Tonight, we take a look at impeachment from several angles: the politics, the hearings, the new developments, and more. Then, the Bloomberg factor. It looks like this guy's getting into the race, but the question is, how big of an impact will he have? Also, the Democratic congressman with a plan to prevent foreign interference in our elections, but Senate Republicans won't even hold a vote on his plan. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and we're going to spend a bulk of tonight's program on impeachment and also the latest on the 2020 race, including the move by Michael Bloomberg. But what we're going to begin tonight with is a topic that is frankly very difficult, but also crucially important. I'm talking about child abduction and abuse and how technology is making it easier for these predators to attack. The Times recently published an extensive piece that showed just how the problem is getting exponentially worse, and also how the government and law enforcement is often ill-equipped to deal with these horrendous crimes. Let's start off with the disturbing numbers. Last year, tech companies reported 45 million online photos and videos of child sexual abuse. As a frame of reference, just a decade ago, that number was less than 1 million. That includes things like child pornography, rape, and torture, with victims as young as infants. The details, frankly, too disturbing and disgusting to talk about in detail on the air here. Something else that's also disturbing is how difficult it is to stop this type of stuff even when identified from happening. 12 years ago, when the problem was growing but not nearly as bad as it is today, congressional hearings that were held on internet sex crimes against children. This is part of the testimony from an FBI agent.
During undercover operations, an IC investigator in Florida received a movie depicting the rape of a 2-year-old child. In accordance with our policy, the movie was sent to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The abuse was so horrific, it even shocked the seasoned analysts at the center. In Wyoming, the smallest state by population, we have over 250 search warrants that we could request if manpower permitted. Our investigators are averaging over 70 hours a week, very frequently working on these investigations.
A short time after that, Congress, they acted. But as the reporting shows, D.C. has dropped the ball. This again from the Times piece. Congress passed legislation that acknowledged the severity of the crisis, but then the federal government largely moved on. Some of the strongest provisions of the law were not fulfilled, and many problems went unfixed. Annual funding for state and regional investigations was authorized at $60 million, but only about half of that amount is regularly approved. Another cornerstone of the law, the biennial strategy. The reports by the Justice Department was mostly ignored. Even the most recent of the 2 reports that were published in 2010 and 2016 didn't include data about some of the most pressing concerns, such as the trade in illicit imagery. Another issue, that is the challenges that the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Quote, as child exploitation has grown on the internet, the center has not kept up. The technology it uses for receiving and reviewing reports of materials was created in 1998, nearly a decade before the first iPhone was released. The center has said it intends to make significant improvements to its technology starting next year in 2020, but the problems, they don't stop there. The police complain that the most urgent reports, they're not prioritized or are sent to the wrong department completely. And adding to the problem, law enforcement agencies that are understaffed and underfunded while trying to deal with, obviously, a growing number of cases. Well, joining me now is a woman who is on the front lines trying to help children. She's also someone, sadly, who knows about this issue firsthand. She's an abduction and rape survivor, Alicia Kozakiewicz. She was only 13 when a man that she met on the internet kidnapped her. Alicia, now an advocate for victims and child safety laws, and she's founder of the Alicia Project. Thank you so much for the time and obviously to be able to do what you've done after such a traumatic experience and to put yourself out there on this takes an unbelievable amount of courage. So let's start there. Talk about what happened on New Year's Day. And you're a 13-year-old girl just outside of Pittsburgh, I understand, and how that day changed your life.
On New Year's Day 2002, I was groomed and lured from my home by an internet predator. And he kidnapped me, and he took me from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to Virginia, where he held me captive in his basement dungeon. And I was raped and beaten and tortured. But miraculously, I was rescued. And it's heartbreaking to know that there are so many children out there who are suffering right now. I was one of the lucky ones, and of course it's hard to share my story, but it's so incredibly important, and we have to do something about this together. Ignoring it is not going to make the problem go away at all.
I gotta tell you, Alicia, I've been doing this for 25 years, and the stuff that I read, I had to put it down a couple times. It was so disturbing. You're brought at certain points to just heartbreaking what these children have endured. You're outraged by these monsters who perpetuate it, and you're angry at the people who are, some doing their best to do it, but also other agencies who are not prioritizing the most vulnerable victims that we have in our society. I can only imagine not only what you've been through personally, but what you've had to, in creating your project, what you've encountered and how you've seen this problem go from horrific to, I don't even know what the word is. We mentioned 45 times the number of videos and pictures that have been produced and shared online just in the last decade. I don't know what the word is after crisis, but we're even past that.
Exactly. You hear the word epidemic, and that's where we're at. We are at an epidemic, and we have to fight this. There are children who are in pain and suffering right now, and people will sometimes say that this is a victimless crime in terms of downloading and viewing this sort of material. And it's been labeled in the past child pornography, and that's something I've been fighting for the last decade or more, because it is not pornography. These are crime scene images of children being raped and tortured, and it's happening, it's real, and they are real children just like I was. And of course the numbers have gone up. There's more people online, and it's so easy to upload material. And in terms of it being a victimless crime, you are calling for a demand by downloading it, and also often to get access to new material, you have to create your own material and become a hands-on offender with unique new material. And I've become close friends with the survivors of this sort of terrible torture. And I can tell you that it does not end with the person stopping the abuse, because that material is out there forever. I have friends who, they go out today, they are adults, and unfortunately they are part of the more popular collections. People apparently collect this like baseball cards, but they are part of the popular collections, and people will come up to them and they actually recognize them from a video of themselves as a child. It's absolutely horrific.
One of the anecdotes I saw in here, just to try and give context to people about not just the number 45 million, but law enforcement's aware of this now. And there was one, I think it was a detective in the LAPD who said, there is so many cases in front of them that they try to find the youngest victims to try and prioritize, to try and identify, to help out these kids. And the guy said, I go home at night and saying, my God, we're living in a world where I can only get to a few of the children that are being sexually assaulted and tortured. And that's how I have to prioritize things in the United States of America. For some reason, that really stuck with me. It's that broad a problem right now, and we are so ill-equipped and ill-funded to properly deal with it.
It's huge. I have sat with Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force officers who have cried because they feel that their hands are tied and that they can't go rescue these children. They see this material every day. What they have to see is just indescribably horrible, and they do have to prioritize, and that's so incredibly hard for them, and they carry that with them. And in 2007, I testified before Congress for the Protect Our Children Act, and it passed, and I remember thinking, yes, these children are going to be saved. I did it. I saved these kids. Mission accomplished. And I realized that it didn't do anything because it wasn't funded. And so with Protect, I created Alicia's Law, And what Alicia's Law does is it helps to fund the Internet Crimes Against Children task forces and provides those resources, those trainings, those boots on the ground. There are 61 ICAC units in the country, which, when you really think about it, that's not very many at all, considering nearly every child is online and on a device, and if they're not, they will be. And so they need to be protected. If there were 10 children in a burning building, all resources would go to that. And it should, don't get me wrong. But there are children who are suffering here, and resources need to go to that. They need to be funded appropriately.
The testimony you did before Congress, apparently there wasn't a dry eye in the lawmakers that sat in front of you. And I believe it was genuine. They all cared, regardless of what political party they came from. But I was reading now that they've diverted some of the funding. Forget about they're not even fully funding it. They're taking some of the money that was supposed to be appropriated to it and doing something with immigration. My point is, to me, and I think I speak for almost everyone, hopefully, protecting children should be the most nonpartisan thing that there is, and is the easiest thing politically to get behind and support. I just still don't get why this wouldn't be the easiest thing for Washington to fully get behind with money and every press conference I'm sure that they'd love to do. Why is there a disconnect? I mean, you were there on the Hill a decade ago. Why do you think it went from there to where we are now?
I was incredibly surprised by that. It was genuine. Their tears were genuine, and they heard it and they listened and they wanted to do something about it. But once I left that room, I think they just sort of had to blank it out. It was too much and they couldn't handle it. And so they pushed it to the back of their minds. And that's not what can happen here. Like I said before, ignoring the problem isn't going to make it go away. These children are still hurting, still suffering, and still being tortured whether or not we talk about it. They need help. And it did surprise me. I remember being so excited that we had this solution. And even with Alicia's Law, I figured we would go in front of these legislators and they would go, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Yes, signing it. That's not the feedback that you get. And I think a big part of that is because first they have to admit that this is happening in their area. And then they have to admit that they have to make a promise that they're going to do something about it. And then they have to follow up on that promise. And I think some people aren't ready to do that. And so many people live in denial. And we cannot ignore this. And these aren't children in other places. These are children in other places, yes, but also in your neighborhood and in your world. In my story, I was rescued because he had created that material. He had live streamed it, and somebody saw it, and they were able to recognize the little girl in that horrible video as the little girl in the missing poster and contacted law enforcement. I was rescued because of that, and because the funding and the resources were there back then, because this wasn't as prolific of a crime. Now there's so much of it, and they are so overworked and underfunded, and some states don't even have one full-time ICAC officer, and that has to change. We have to empower the good guys. There are so many bad people out there, and we have to empower the good guys to make a difference.
I thought I knew a lot about these things. I had no idea, and I think I speak for most, the volume of the number of assaults and the documentation of the imagery that's being trafficked online, how fast this thing has spread, and how ill-equipped we are to deal with it. But I can't commend you enough for what you've done with by coming forward and speaking so honestly, and what you're doing with the Alicia Project. Hopefully with not just your work here, but also the Times reporting and others, more people be aware of, as you say, nothing short of an epidemic in this country. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, we're going to be right back, and we'll have much more on RFL after this.